Okay, good to go.
Good.
All right. Oops, I'll hide that first. And there we go. Can't forget Ronnie. All right, folks. Welcome to the first weekly WeHa.com Roundtable of 2021. I'm John Lyons, joined as always by Ronni Newton, the managing editor of WeHa.com. Probably not since our very first show back in early March has there been so much breaking news happening so fast. Unfounded claims of election fraud supported by formerly respected members of the House and Senate, complicitly aligning with the president with the only goal of advancing their presidential aspirations by wooing Trump supporters. Did Trump Jr. and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani incite a riot? Did they commit a crime? Did the likes of Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley commit crimes? Do they deserve to stay in the Senate or in Congress? Finally, what are the options for Trump going forward? What are the potential consequences for his and his elected supporters who went to the mat on the issue of election fraud? Tonight, we welcome two experts on the Constitution and on legal matters pertaining to government. Matt Warshauer is a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University, and Dallas Dodge is a Juris Doctorate, a lawyer, and is current corporation counsel for the town of West Hartford. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well, John. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, John. I'm doing well also. Thanks.
Well, good. Keeping in the spirit of breaking news, less than an hour ago, and I'm going to put a slide on the screen, so we're going to end up hiding us again here. But we got the second impeachment of Trump's presidency, and the final vote was 232 to 197. 10 Republicans crossed over. They expected 7. Some expected 7, some expected 9. And then there were 4 no votes on the Republican side, which I view as fairly telling too. So we've got a lot of news happening, and we're going to bring us back up here. Why don't we start with you, Matt? Let's talk about last time we had you on, we brought you on to talk about your Halloween, the Halloween displays that you put on every year, which are incredible. And I think I spent the first 35 minutes of the show talking to you about constitutional issues. We were right on top of the election. I think everybody sensed that there was going to be some, shall we say, give and take with respect to the results of the election. Matt, I guess talk us through, what happened on November 3rd. Was everything copacetic? Was there anything that went wrong? Kind of walk us through that.
On the whole, there was nothing major that went wrong. There have been major studies of presidential elections over decades, and the degree of voter fraud in the United States is so incredibly low as to be virtually minuscule. And in particular, in regards to what happened in the 2016 election, with so much concern about foreign involvement, i.e. Russia, this election was watched meticulously. Now, of course, COVID made things that much more harrowing because people weren't going to be able to show up. There was much more absentee balloting, things like that. But this election was watched very, very carefully, and Trump's own election guru, his manager, who was overseeing all this and watching what was going on, said that everything went really well, and then Trump fired him for making that statement. So, the idea that there was massive election voter fraud is just simply unfounded. We know that we've had 60 cases before various courts of judges who were democratically nominated, judges who were Republican in their background, and no court, not one, has come up with any determination that there was fraud in this election. So it's just unfounded, and this is the major problem: is that Trump and so many Republicans were continuing to state that the election was stolen, which just and let's also remember, and I'll finish with this is something that he put forward prior to the 2016 election, when he didn't believe that he was going to win that election. He kept saying, and there's going to be fraud, and it won't be a proper election. And then he won, and he had nothing to say about fraud.
Okay, so one of the narratives has been, I'm not going to get into machines and all that. That's not our area of expertise. It's not what we're here to talk about. But one of the narratives we've heard pushed by Trump's team, trying to push the overall fraud narrative, is Well, Trump was way ahead early on in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Georgia, and I think even Texas. But Texas ended up going pretty easily to Trump in the end. And then Biden kind of caught up, and it rubbed people the wrong way. Geez, where are these votes coming from? Talk a little bit about what that phenomena was.
Well, I think a lot of that. I mean, look, we always know that we're used to instantaneous everything these days, right? But counting these votes, and especially this time around, counting these votes and double counting these votes to make sure they're absolutely accurate, it takes time. But one of the other things that we know is that in rural areas, there is a tendency that there's not necessarily as many people voting, and therefore there's a fewer number of votes that need to be cast. In the urban areas, it generally takes a bit longer for those votes to be fully tabulated and then turned in. And we have in this country a very, very much a rural-urban divide, and we saw that in Georgia just a little over a week ago, where at first Republicans were ahead, and then as more votes came in from the larger populated urban areas, things flipped. So, I mean, I think that pretty well explains that phenomenon.
And I think the Georgia election, the Senate runoffs were fascinating. I think that's a topic for a show on its own, because so many things broke in the last week. Trump calling for the $2,000 stimulus, Mitch McConnell going against him. The candidates not knowing, where to side on this whole fraudulent claim issue. I mean, it was a pretty brutal run up to their election. And then I think over $250 million was spent. I don't remember if it's by each side, but like I said, I think that election is a topic for a show on its own. So, all right. So November 3rd happens, and the networks are being very, very careful. I don't think the race got called until Saturday late morning, if I remember correctly, when Georgia finally came in. So then we go through kind of weeks of, and I personally felt it was going to happen for a little while, and I think it got perpetuated, the cynic in me, because it turned into a cash cow for a lot of these people, whether it be Trump, whether it be Hawley, whether it be Ted Cruz, whether it be I'm trying to remember the name of the second second in line in Congress, and it just minority speaker in Congress, and it just minority leader, and it just I personally felt frustrated because it just seemed like it turned into a money thing. But while it did that, it whipped up all of these supporters, and it made millions of people start to question our election system. So we fast forward to January 6th. Trump has his rally in DC and calls on people to march, I guess. And Matt, I'll stick with you for a moment. Constitutionally, was there anything Trump could have done to legally overturn the election? Was there any basis anywhere along the way for him to legally overturn the election?
Absolutely not, nor was there in the Congress. And that was discussed by many, many constitutional and political science experts and historians, that, once the Electoral College, the states have done their own voting, and they've turned over those electoral votes to the Congress, the Congress's job is really pro forma, unless there is a clearly disputed set of electoral votes from a state or states. That's happened a number of times in the past, over many decades, over a century in some cases. But no, I mean, once those votes by the states are cast, the electoral votes are turned in, that's it. There's nothing that can be done there. There's no court that you can turn to. It's a done deal.
So Mike Pence was put in a virtually untenable situation for his more or less ceremonial oversight of the certification of the votes.
Exactly right.
Of the officially, ruling on the votes, if you will. And yet there were people who broke into the House of Representatives calling for the hanging of Pence. So pretty ugly.
I think, John, what you also have to note, you had prefaced this question by asking if, by stating that, it's recently that there was this great challenge to the idea of the votes. But let's remember that, as I had said before, Trump had been prepping his base for the entirety of his presidency and even before by talking about the deep state, by talking about fraud, by talking about you can only trust me. And so this is a frenzy that is not just a sudden feeding frenzy. This had been whipped up for a solid 5 years. So, I mean, obviously more people were pulled in by, all the push after November. But this has been going for quite some time, and it's not going to go away for quite some time.
And I think that's one of the things that's most shocking to me is I can look at Trump objectively. He's not a politician. He doesn't understand how any of this stuff works. And he's got his own self-interest, legacy, if you will, to protect. But what really horrified me is the people who followed him. And again, we're going to touch a little bit on that, whether laws were broken by other people. So Dallas, let's talk about it. We've all seen the video of Trump whipping up the crowd, but let's start with Giuliani and his son Don Jr. really whipping the crowd and saying very, very incendiary things. I mean, there's going to be an investigation. Are there charges that are going to come? Do you think? Let's start with Giuliani and with Don Jr. Do you think they're going to be charged with a crime? And if so, what crime would it be, or what crimes?
I think for particular individuals like that, John, there's a very, very high bar in terms of charging an actual crime for speech, and that'll be very difficult for prosecutors to meet. The easier bars for people who actually occupied and committed violence and vandalism within the U.S. Congress. And I think that some of the charges you've seen so far, which are essentially on the order of trespass and unlawfully being in places within Congress that you shouldn't be, a lot of those charges are going to be upgraded soon, I think, to things like insurrection and perhaps treason. And so there's a lot of people who have a lot of cause to be worried right now. And I think that the U.S. Attorney and the District of Columbia, or rather the acting U.S. Attorney, is taking it very seriously. But, in terms of what happened that day, is you can't just look at it within the context of that one rally. This was a long buildup. And we have there's a poison that has infected the U.S. political system when we have a two-party system, and one of the parties, a significant, probably almost majority of it, has taken the position that they simply won't accept the legitimacy of an election that they didn't win, or if they didn't win it, that they won't accept the legitimacy of that. And so I think as the Senate looks at this, the House impeached today and the Senate will now hold a trial, they won't just be looking at what happened that day. They'll be looking at the whole context of everything that happened from before the election, through the election, and after the election, up to that rally. It's going to be a continuum that they have to look at in terms of how did the president incite people to commit violence and to commit insurrection against the United States.
And that's the $1 million question. How far, there's, in terms of a playing area, there's black, there's white, and I don't mean this racially, I just mean in terms of how far you push the envelope. There's black, there's white, and then there's that gray area, and how far into that gray area did Trump go? So treason is a really heavy word. I mean, that's my understanding is that is a death penalty crime. I don't know if that's changed, but I know it was for, decades and decades and decades and decades. So you've got 2,000 or 3,000 people who broke into the building. How do they decide treason versus, kind of going through the level of charges that you just went through? Who's going to be charged with treason?
Well, I think the most likely charges, and I may have misspoken a little bit, is probably, sedition and insurrection. And sedition is the incitement of violence against the government, against the governing authority, and then insurrection is the actual committing violence. And so they'll be looking at that. with regard to folks at the Capitol. And, one of the amazing things now is with the proliferation of, there are cameras all over the Capitol, and many of the folks who were there actually filmed and recorded the crimes that they were committing and then went and posted them on the internet. And so there's a huge amount of evidence that is readily available for federal investigators. And it's not just what's in plain sight, what people posted on the internet, but also, videos within Congress that we haven't even seen yet. And so there's a lot of people this week, unfortunately, some who are probably in our own community, both locally and in Connecticut, who have FBI agents knocking on their door.
Can I ask a kind of more basic question about that? So the Capitol is a public building. The Capitol grounds are public grounds. At what point does being on those premises become an unlawful act? Is just being there an issue, or going inside when you're not supposed to be because it's closed to the public at that point? Where's the line?
It's a good question, Ronnie, and you're already seeing some people raise the defense of, I basically just walked through an open door. How was I supposed to know that this wasn't sort of an open area for the public? I think it's obvious to almost anybody that the chambers themselves are not open to the public, particularly while there's a joint session going on. And there's specific crimes that address that make it illegal to occupy parts of the Capitol that you're not allowed to be in. But you also then have, first of all, the violence. In a lot of instances, there were assaults that were committed against both police and members of the media, probably other staff as well. And then the vandalism that happened. And then I think we can't lose sight of what was the underlying purpose of all of this. You see the folks who have zip ties, who I think that the clear intent there was to capture and kidnap members of Congress. And what's even scarier is for what purpose? What would have happened if that had been allowed to occur? But the fundamental purpose of all of this, the fundamental reason for going in there, was to disrupt and stop Congress from fulfilling its constitutional duty. And that in and of itself is just sort of a fundamental act of insurrection. And we can't get into sort of, relative truth on this too, which is, to the extent that people, it's not debatable whether or not Joe Biden was duly elected. As Matt said, the Constitution is pretty clear that Congress's only role in federal elections for president is simply to count the electoral votes in the presence of the vice president. And it's interesting how there's been this sort of role reversal where you've seen a lot of Democrats suddenly become Federalists, and a lot of and some conservatives. I won't say a lot because I think there were many conservatives such as Rand Paul and Dan Crenshaw who defended the Electoral College, but other people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz who really sort of rejected the traditional states' rights federalist arguments that you see a lot of conservatives make. And I think what a lot of people have seen now is, the only time many people think about the Electoral College is in the context of, say, the 2000 election with Gore v. Bush, or some of the questions about whether the popular vote should control. But there was sort of a genius in how the founders established the Electoral College, in that they intentionally made it a temporary body that would only be created every 4 years for one purpose, and that was to elect the president of the United States, or the president and the vice president of the United States. And one sort of, one little rule to it too that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is, and you see how purposeful this is that no person who has a federal office can serve as an elector in the Electoral College. And the reason was because the founders foresaw things like this and were worried about a situation where you might have somebody serving as an elector who was beholden to the current chief executive of the executive branch of the United States. And so they very purposefully wanted this temporary body that was established to cast votes, the state's votes for president, and then immediately dissolve and wouldn't be beholden to anybody. And I think that, there are many valid criticisms of a lot of aspects of the Electoral College, but the plain fact of the matter is, I think we saw it work this time around, and the importance of leaving it to the states and sort of having this diffusion of power that's not centralized in the federal government when it comes to conducting our elections.
So let's, Dallas, let's shift gears here a little bit. Let's talk about Ted Cruz. Ted signed on, I believe, with 11 other senators, filed suit, was the lead plaintiff out of the state of Texas in a case that went before the Supreme Court and was not heard by the Supreme Court. It was presented to the Supreme Court. Talk to us give us the details of that case, help people understand what that case was. Why was Ted Cruz involved with it? Why was Texas involved with it when Trump won the Electoral College votes from Texas? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Unfortunately, I can't remember. I'm not particularly familiar with the details of that case, although I think I probably was about 2 weeks ago, John.
A lot happened.
So much has happened. But, in terms of guys like Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz and Senator Hawley, I think Lawrence Tribe put it very well. I saw him on TV the other night, and he was remarking on Senator Cruz and said, Senator Cruz is obviously probably one of the smartest people in the Senate. He clerked for the U.S. Supreme Court, has Ivy League credentials. It's not that he's dumb and doesn't know about and isn't aware of the Constitution. It's just that he doesn't give a damn about it. And I think that it was unquestionably, for both of those senators, just a craven political attempt to court a certain segment of their party and also to fundraise.
My sense is one person's opinion, but I think Ted Cruz might have overestimated the respect. And, I do have friends who are Trump supporters. I try to be open-minded. I try to talk to everybody. I think he's overestimated the respect he has from Trump supporters because he just, Trump pretty much, put him, belittled him in 2016, and Trump supporters have long memories. So I don't see what kind of political future Ted Cruz has. Could he face? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Especially when the Houston Chronicle comes out with a headline that says Senator Cruz resign.
Yeah, there's call. I mean, there's calls for resignations or call at least for him to lose his. I think it's his Judiciary Committee. Lose his role on the Judiciary Committee. So he's got some tough times ahead of him. And Dallas, you referred to some local folks, and there was. I'm not going to mention names. I'm not trying to go after anybody here, but there was a local politician who, I believe, innocently said something, but unfortunately, her timing was terrible, and she's catching a lot of flack for it. And I think these are the types of things that aren't going to go away for people who hope to have a future political career. Anything involving insurrection, anything involving going against the whole of the U.S. government, even if it's very peripherally, I think somebody's going to have a hard time shaking as long as they're active in politics. So Matt, back to the constitutional piece of it. Is this all over?
No, it's definitely not over. I mean, we had a vote on impeachment today, right? It's not over. What happens in the Senate as to whether or not this current Senate is able to take it up before the 20th, which I seriously doubt they will, and then it turns over to the next Senate. What I think is really critical and a lot of people don't fully understand, and in fact, I was listening to an interview this morning with a Republican representative from Colorado who was claiming that Nancy Pelosi was just a cynical, attempt to, just besmirch the Trump, and that it was all about fundraising. And The impeachment issue is much, much more than that. And the key component of impeachment here is in holding someone accountable for their public conduct. And we have to remember, as Dallas was saying about the question of are we going to be able to prove that Donald Trump Jr. and Rudy Giuliani are guilty of a crime. I fully concur with Dallas on that. I don't think you're going to be able to prove that. But when you are holding public office, and impeachment isn't necessarily about proving a crime. And, we can talk about some of the slides that I had sent you. But one of the key things that people have to understand is that if Trump is found guilty by the Senate under impeachment, he can never hold office again.
Now, I've heard a couple versions of that, Matt, so let me make sure. So don't they have to specifically include that as part of the conviction process?
Absolutely not. The Constitution itself, the clause in the Constitution states very, very clearly that you will not be able to hold public office any longer.
Okay,
well,
but that's only if it's approved by the Senate too, right?
Right. Yeah.
Correct.
I think first of all, it's it actually is a two-step process where the Senate. And first of all, the only sort of model that we have for this, because don't forget, no president has ever been convicted in the Senate. And I want to talk in a little bit about sort of, to put this particular impeachment within the historic context of other impeachments. But when in the Senate, under the Constitution, the actual conviction is by a 2/3 vote, and that's necessary for removal from office. In order to prevent somebody from ever holding, I believe it's worded as, a position of honor or office.
It's not 2/3. You can have a simple majority to convict in the Senate.
I'm fairly certain it's a 2/3 vote, Matt, to convict in the Senate. But to prevent somebody from ever holding office, there's no number of votes specified, and so you sort of revert to the typical parliamentary rules, and so that would be a majority vote. And so, if the Senate were to convict the president, they would need to do that by a supermajority. And then, if they wanted to prevent him from ever holding federal office again, they could do that by a simple majority.
That was what my understanding was too. So, and I thought it was a two-step process, but it's, this is a murky area. This is not something that people have ever talked about, or at least seriously since 1974, because I think there was no question Clinton was not going to get convicted. So I think we're back to August of 74 on that one. So let me, Matt, let me do this. I'm going to bring up your slides. So bear with me. The videos are going to stop for folks here. Yeah, go ahead, Ronnie.
I was going to say Google does say 2/3 vote of the Senate to convict.
To convict and remove, right.
And the penalty for an impeached official upon conviction is removal from office.
Right.
And that's Senate.gov history.
Yeah. So Matt, I've got your slides up here. The first slide you've got is a quote from Alexander Hamilton. Talk to us a little bit about that.
All right, let me pull that one up for myself. So this is from Hamilton. This is from Federalist number 65, and he's talking about the nature of what impeachment should be. And of course, the Federalist Papers were attempts to advertise for and promote the passage of the Constitution, in particular in New York State. And what Hamilton says here, and this is the key component of it, is in blue, you can see. It states a well-constituted court for the trial of impeachments, the subjects of its jurisdiction are those offenses which proceed from the misconduct of public men, or in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. They are of a nature which may be peculiar propriety be denominated political, as they relate chiefly to the injuries done immediately to the society itself. And so if you're talking about inciting insurrection and improper conduct or misconduct of a public officer, I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. And then it says further later in the document, it says, what it may be asked is the true spirit of the institution itself, meaning the impeachment body.
Is it not designed as a method of national inquest into the conduct of public men? And so, the founders, they foresaw these issues and these problems of power that existed.
And then you've got a couple other slides here. We talk about the U.S. Constitution, a couple of articles. So, Matt, I'll let you take us through this.
Well, the first article is simply Article 1, Section 3, which talks about the impeachment clause itself. And it says it shall not extend further than removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor. So that's what I'm talking about with that it states, you're going to be disqualified to hold office. But you could still be liable to criminal punishment. The other slide has to do with the 14th Amendment, Section 3, and this is something historians have been bringing up quite a bit of late, just over the past few days, is that there is a section of the 14th Amendment that not too many people think about or remember, and that has to do with the attempt by Republicans of that day, of the Civil War era, of keeping those who had been major leaders of the Confederacy that had served in the Congress or served as judges previously, and then violated their oaths to the Constitution by being involved in the Civil War. So they were trying to deal with those people by including this part of the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, where it states, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States. And now this is the key part, because it doesn't say president or vice president in this, but hold any office, civil or military, or under any state who, having previously taken an oath, of course the president takes an oath, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Now, what is given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof? I don't think you're going to be able to prove, as Dallas had said earlier, that the president helped to engage in insurrection or rebellion. Did he foment it? We could have an argument of that. Did he give aid and comfort to the enemies thereof? And this is going to replay for a lot of people in regards to this question of him saying, you're special, we love you, calling them forward to march on the Capitol. These are the issues that are going to arise.
So I'm going to take this down and bring us back up here. So bear with me a second. So
I got to grab a plug to stick into my phone.
okay, all right. So I do want to move the conversation over to, and I think to Matt's point and to the Constitution's point, it's tricky because it's not. I don't feel it's black and white. I definitely feel it was over the line. That's just an opinion, but it's not. I think it's going to be a tough. I think it's going to be a tough debate going forward. And McConnell has not stated where he's going to go. I know the Senate will probably follow his lead on it. And I think the talk now is they're going to wait, let Biden get through his 100 days in 100 first days in office to kind of, hit the ground running. But let's move over to the 25th Amendment, which that talk is quieted down. In the introductory remarks, I said there's a lot of news happening, and earlier today it was made very clear that Pence does not support invoking the 25th. I personally think if they were going to invoke it, they would have done it last Wednesday. Didn't happen. That's quieted down. But Dallas, why don't you give us a rundown what your understanding is of the 25th? I believe it's Article 2, Section 4, if I remember correctly. Talk to us a little bit about the 25th. Do you think it was a close call? What have you heard?
Yeah, what a lot of people are arguing, I think what the vice president has said is that the 25th Amendment really deals with presidential impairment and incapacity to carry out the duties of office. And I think most people have thought of it in terms of sort of medical incapacity or things like that. When we've seen the 25th Amendment invoked, it's typically if a president is going under anesthesia or something like that. And so whether it's appropriate for this particular situation, I'm not sure. I think that like impeachment, it's fundamentally a political question. What constitutes incapacity or impairment? Could a unwillingness to simply carry out the duties of office be considered incapacity? And I would argue that perhaps refusing to marshal the forces of the United States to protect the U.S. Congress might in and of itself be an incapacity. And so, whether the 25th Amendment is appropriate or not is I think, debatable. But I do think it goes to sort of another issue, which is we've seen one troubling thing that started last week, and I'm happy that it seems like it's slowed down now, is that we saw Elaine Chao resign as Secretary of Transportation and Betsy DeVos resign as Secretary of Education. And also the acting director of Homeland Security has now resigned. We also have an acting attorney general. And, cabinet secretaries are officers of the United States, and they take an oath to the Constitution, not to the man, not to the president who currently inhabits the office. And, I think that for folks who are in that position right now, it's critically important that they not abandon their post. And I understand that they may be disgusted or revolted by presidential conduct, but they play an important role in the 25th Amendment, and that you need the cabinet to vote to support a vice presidential declaration that the president is incapacitated if it gets to that point. And if we simply have, and if those officers have resigned and they're simply acting people in their place, I think there's a question whether those acting people can even vote to invoke the 25th Amendment. Right. And again, an acting person who's not been confirmed by the Senate is probably more likely to be loyal, to have loyalty to the person who's in the office and not to the office itself of presidency. And so, I'm happy that it seems like we haven't seen many more resignations, at least at the cabinet level, and I hope that we don't, because I think it's critically important that we sort of continue to have a full complement of cabinet secretaries available in case it does get to that point where the 25th Amendment needs to be invoked. And by the way, there's a complicated process if it were to be invoked, where Congress actually has a role, where there's congressional review of the 25th Amendment being invoked, and then it goes back to the cabinet. And so it's not just a matter of sort of snapping your fingers and all of a sudden the president is no longer has the duties of president. By the way, it doesn't remove the president from the office of presidency. It simply temporarily removes his powers and duties as president.
Yeah. I think a lot of these.
Dallas, do those rules go into effect if a president goes under anesthesia? All of the whole processes of it being reviewed by Congress, or is it just if it's invoked for a different reason?
There's different rules. Presidents can invoke the 25th Amendment themselves, which they typically do when they go under anesthesia. And so there's a different process there. And typically too, that's only for a matter of a few hours. It's not for an extended period. We haven't seen, thank God, a president be ill for a particularly long period of time. But it's sort of incredible. And Matt is a professor. It's got to be fascinating to live history right now. Just where you realize all these situations that are coming up, these questions, there's not clear-cut answers to them because of how historic they are, and it's really so unprecedented what's going on in the country right now.
And it's Dallas is right, and it's also the nature of democracy, and we can't forget. And this is something that I impress upon my students, and every time I teach U.S. political history, is our republic is an experiment in government, in representative government. And we can't ever forget that. And it's constantly, there are constantly new ideas coming forth, and we might argue over some of the same things for decades and decades and decades. But there are new issues that come forth, like the one that we're living through right now when we are living history. And our job as a republic, and Lincoln had said that we are the last best hope of Earth, right? Winston Churchill said, yeah, democracy is horrible. It's just terrible. It's the worst form of government, except for all the others, right? And so this is a test of our system. And the question is, how do we move forward from here? And Lincoln faced exactly the same thing. Even when he was victorious in his second election, he had to figure out, how do I now go forward and heal the nation? And I would encourage viewers to go back and read his second inaugural, because that's what the entire thing was about. And if you've ever been to the Lincoln Memorial in DC, the entire second inaugural is inscribed on the wall there. And his greatest concern, as I'm sure Biden's is how do we move forward and try and secure the nation, of course, which is what we need to do, and stop the insurrection. But how do we go forward to heal the nation? And that is an extremely difficult thing to do. And I talk to a lot of my friends who are Democrats, and they are as angry and livid over what has happened as Republicans are over their belief that, the election was stolen.
It's complicated. I commented earlier, a lot of this, particularly pertaining to, Trump's remarks and all that, is not black and white. In Dallas, I think you brought up a good point talking about the 25th Amendment, where it was designed, if I recall, after the Kennedy assassination. Is that right? Okay. It was just, so it was, 63, 64. It was designed, and it was designed for medical purposes. And I'm reminded of a great movie. If you've not, I'm sure everybody here has seen it, but if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Remember the Caine Mutiny? One of my favorite movies of all time. Ronnie, we've been talking a lot about movies the last 24 hours. So somebody in the remarks last night quoted the American president when at a council meeting. I thought that was a great moment. But so another favorite movie of mine. But I would recommend seeing that movie, and where they relieve Captain Queeg of power, and then it ends up as a court-martial, and it wasn't black and white, and it was very, very, very gray. And that, putting it into politicizing this, or even making it look like it could be argued that it's politicized versus kind of, hey, this is a slam dunk. This is, really the faculties aren't there to continue the powers of the presidency, whatever reason. I don't know. I don't think it's as easy, and I do respect Pence's apprehension in invoking it. I don't think it was a slam dunk call as some have presented it to be. But scary times, because he did help incite an insurrection. So hopefully we've begun the process of healing. So
John, I think one really scary thing to think about too is that I believe that there were, and it's been reported that there are a number of members of Congress who said that part of the reason they voted against impeachment was because they fear for their lives and fear for their families' lives.
Yeah.
And part of that is connected to the fact that I think many members of Congress, having lived through January 6th now, don't know that they can rely on the commander-in-chief to protect them, on the current commander-in-chief to protect them. And that dynamic, fortunately, will be removed if impeachment is taken up in the Senate after Joe Biden takes the oath of office. And so you will see sort of a new dynamic at that point. But that's scary in and of itself. And we've got to look at the historic context of this, where when you look at other impeachments, first of all, President Trump is only the third president in the history of the United States to have been impeached. He's now the only president to have been impeached twice. But not only that, when you look at the seriousness of the charges here and how they differ from, Bill Clinton was impeached for effectively having committed perjury, which in many jurisdictions would be a misdemeanor. Andrew Johnson was impeached for what was effectively a political struggle
Right.
between him and Congress over the Tenure Act.
After the fact.
Yeah, they were, even if you sort of agreed that they had committed the conduct that they were accused of, I think there was this legitimate question of, did it arise to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor? But here you have a president of the United States being accused of insurrection, and that's it's sort of a different level than even the other two impeachments that we've seen in the history of the country. It's a different level of seriousness.
I often debate politics with a very good friend of mine who's a very learned historian. We often talk about Nixon, and he thinks, now he's a big Nixon fan, and in fact I've learned so much about Nixon through him and how moderate he really was. He tried to introduce national health care, which is, I never knew that, so little details. And but he views the Trump impeachment, this one, the second one, is far more serious than had impeachment gone through for Nixon. He views this as a far more serious crime, and I think he's, as a Nixon expert, I trust his judgment on that.
You know, the difference is, I think the other impeachments have involved sort of an abuse of power, or really in the case of President Clinton, sort of a pedestrian, not to say that what he did was right, but whether it rose to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor. But insurrection differs from both of those situations in that it's a crime against the United States itself. This is not jaywalking. It's not committing a crime against just another person. This is a crime against the country itself, what the president has been accused of.
John, what's interesting here is I think that what Clinton did does rise to a misdemeanor, obviously. I mean, he lied to a grand jury, he committed perjury.
He also used the power of the office to, and I think that's an important fact. I know that wasn't one of the impeachment articles, but he did use the power of the office to, shall we say, arrive at his,
Sure.
Yeah,
so,
I don't know how to put it, but
he didn't, his act of his misdemeanor of lying to the grand jury wasn't done in the guise of the presidency, right? It wasn't a presidential act. He lost his law license in Arkansas for it, right?
Yep.
So that's one thing. I know a number of historians who are very, I'm not an expert on Nixon, but who feel that Trump, going into his first impeachment trial last year, had done far more than Nixon had actually done. And Nixon was going through the impeachment process and resigned only because he knew he wasn't going to get enough Senate votes to survive.
And I believe he had the majority of the Senate, if I recall, in '74. I believe the Republicans held the Senate.
Yeah, that's when he decided. But, in regards to, just one last thing, in regards to what Dallas said about, some Republican representative senators who decided to not vote against against Trump in the first impeachment trial because they were afraid for their lives. Well, when you take an oath to the Constitution as a representative, you take an oath to the Constitution. You are supposed to uphold the laws of the United States. And when I hear something like that, and I think about our soldiers who are going overseas and fighting on behalf of the United States and upholding their oath to the Constitution, I think, these people, if they cannot stand up and defend the United States for fear of a president or for fear of his followers, that's the very nature of the issue of power and liberty that is at the heart of this nation's history. They shouldn't be serving as representatives or senators if they can't make those tough decisions.
There is talk of writing a law and giving all of Congress additional security, which sadly in these times probably makes sense. Probably made sense before these times, but anyway. So I think of the quote from Bill Clinton, and I always laugh. I use it to this day. It depends on what your definition of is, and one of the all-time famous lines that came out of that trial in the Senate. So anyway, we've kind of zipped through this hour here. Matt, I guess I'll start with you, or Ronnie, I'll start with you. Any last questions for Matt or Dallas before we start to
Well, I
wrap
got
up?
one question via text, which is, what's the difficulty in impeaching someone after they've left off? Anybody want to answer that?
I don't think anybody can give you a straight answer on that because it's never been done. But the fact
it's never
that
happened.
the impeachment process has begun and charges have been filed, my sort of educated determination would be they have to follow through the process. They can't leave it open-ended. But I don't think anybody's going to be able to give you an absolute determination because it's just never happened.
Yeah, I think that the model is the impeachment generally applies to all federal officers, which is generally interpreted to be judges, cabinet secretaries, that sort of thing. And so I believe there are some judges who have been impeached, and even after they've resigned. But what's the point of moving forward after the president leaves office? Yes, of course. One of the potential punishments is gone, which is removal of office. You can't remove somebody from office who no longer holds it. But what remains is that question of preventing that person from ever holding federal office in the United States again. And so, that will effectively be what will be on trial. Will be, the president can't be removed, but what will be on trial will be is the Senate going to allow the president to ever run for office again?
And aren't there other pieces to that too, like no longer being able to be involved in security briefings and other rights that former presidents have that would be taken away at that point? Or
they take away his pension. I'm pretty sure of that too.
Well, the right to, I don't believe there's a right of presidents to receive security briefings, and I'm by no means an expert in national security. But I don't believe there's a right. I believe that some former presidents have been allowed to continue to receive security briefings because, first of all, typically people who have been president are of high character and obviously were able to be trusted with the nation's secrets while they're in office. And I think that current presidents, value their judgment and perspective and advice on current events. And I think more often than people realize or are aware, presidents talk to their predecessors, even predecessors who were members of the other party, to get their perspective on foreign relations and that sort of thing. So I don't believe there's a right to receive classified briefings, and I would be shocked if the Biden administration were to allow President Trump to receive classified briefings after he leaves office.
Agreed. Matt, any last words before we wrap up? I do have two news stories that broke during this broadcast, and I'll share them with you now. Ronnie, I'm sure you saw them too. But Matt, any last words?
I did want to ask Matt one more question.
Go ahead.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Matt,
Ronnie,
so Matt, in one of your displays a couple of years ago, you focused on the death of democracy. Has that happened? Can we come back from that? And I mean, this is probably too big a question, but how do we get out of this? What has this uncovered in our democracy that really is in serious need of repair? It's probably another hour.
That's a semester course, Ronnie.
Sorry.
Can we come back from this? Yes, of course we can come back from this. I have never seen politics and partisanship this bad in my lifetime. I think a lot of historians would agree that we haven't seen anything this bad since really the Civil War era. And are we on, John had said something earlier that sort of rubbed my ear, made my ears burn, that we're on the road to healing. I don't know that we're there yet, John. Perhaps when Biden comes in, maybe that will be the beginning of it. But, we have not talked very much about the fact that, 10 days ago, a RV exploded on the streets of Nashville. And it wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to create destruction. My concern is we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. We can't forget that the first act of large scale, I mean, truly large scale terrorism against the United States was a form of domestic terrorism, not foreign terrorism. And it predated 9/11. And that was Oklahoma City and Timothy McVeigh. That came from an extreme right-wing Christian identity group. We've got to keep that in mind. These people and these organizations have been preparing for this for 30 years. And they're not going to go away quickly. And so what can we do about it? We have to take it more seriously. Our federal government, the FBI, has to take it more seriously and go after it more fully. But I think the real key to this, and I've been thinking about this for about the last 2 years, the real key is what is happening right now with all of these corporations that are pulling their money from and shutting down extremists. And that's what needs to happen. Americans of conscience need to stop spending their dollars on any organization that supports these organizations. And for example, if you are, as I am, sort of appalled by something like Fox News or Breitbart, you find out who's advertising on those organizations and you stop supporting them. Then you let them know you're going to stop supporting them. In America, the mighty dollar is all. Mm-hmm. And that's a way to go about doing with this with the least amount of bloodshed as possible. At least I believe it. So it's an idea.
But that's also where, Ronnie, I'm hopeful because I think, as Matt said earlier, and the mayor actually said last night, Mayor Cantor said the American experiment has never been easy. It's been messy. It's been difficult. We fought a civil war where there were 400,000 Union casualties defending the Union. It's never been easy, and it's not supposed to be easy. And so I'm somewhat hopeful. I think this is probably one of the most difficult times. I think that this is the first time where we've seen where sort of the rot is at the top. But at the same time, I am hopeful that we will be able to get through this because we have before.
Yep.
And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to be a long road, but I think that we are going to start making progress. And I think that constitutional democracy will survive this.
And on that note, Trump did just put out a video and he condemned the Capitol violence. And he said that, quote, violence and vandalism have absolutely no place in our country. So that video came out while we were broadcasting here. Ronni, any last questions before I sign off? I got one more news story. I think did you see the Lamont story? I'll let you share.
I wanted to just wish Governor Lamont good healing from his hip replacement that happened today.
So we're wishing Governor Lamont well. We had him on in November, and we hope for a quick recovery so we can get you back on and get him back on and do some more grilling of our governor. So Dallas Dodge, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm with you. I think the glass is half full. I hope that's the case. It's a complicated time for us. Matt Warshauer, again, thank you for your expertise. We're grateful for having you on, and we hope.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you guys will come on again. And for Ronni Newton, I am John Lyons, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you.